Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. Basically, we are we're trying to thread the needle here, folks. Trying to thread the needle. Chris Courtney here, new Pragmatic. Just checking CouchBot. There was a slight update tweak to the YouTube API over the weekend, so I'm just going to watch and make sure that this actually updates and pushes properly to Discord. Um, the internet is basically a big um, a big box with a lot of patch cords hooking everything together. And anytime something changes, I'm always curious if we're going to get the same result out the next day. I'm confident, though. I'm confident CouchBot's going to work for us today. But that said, it is good to be back. It's I'm absolutely ecstatic about the day and week that we have ahead of us. We've got some new content coming out, and it would be really amazing if I could do the job of being a good editor right now. Just while we're waiting for this to kick in, because I'll clip this off the finished version of the feedback loop. But while we're waiting to kick in, I'm writing this piece right now on how we got to the point where components were so critical, and basically it was not just the smartphone coming out. The smartphone was kind of the impetus for CouchBot fired. CouchBot fired. So I'm gonna flip this back around. Welcome to the feedback loop. Chris Courtney here, new Pragmatic. It's Monday morning. It's we're still practicing our social distancing, but we've been practicing our social distancing here since September because we've been remote the entire time. Welcome to this world for the rest of you. I was just talking about the next chapter that I'm working through right now on components. And if you're in the interface design program, you are heading headlong toward this chapter and the associated exercises. But Kara was mentioning on Discord how it sounded like it was an interesting topic, and it is because basically components grew out of, there was a sequence of things that happened. The smartphone revolution started in 2007. And that really pushed a lot of things forward. I actually included a link to the first debut of or the first presentation of the iPhone, where Steve Jobs is presenting the Safari web browser, and it's a full web browser in your hand, and he's pinching and zooming or double tapping to get to particular areas of the New York Times homepage, or to get to particular areas of the Amazon homepage. And it dawned on me, and then it was like creakily loading. There was like this awkward silence for like 30 seconds where he's just waiting for Amazon to load on the screen. And what you discover in that instance is you remember that there was a world where responsive design didn't exist. There was a world where web typography did not exist. There was a world where bandwidth, we just didn't wake up with the bandwidth that we have now. And there are still places in the world that lack the bandwidth that we are blessed to have. And I know that there are even other countries that have blazing fast 5G capabilities that we don't have currently in the States. So I understand that there's these different levels, but when it all started, all that was missing. And one of the things that's interesting is that it kicked off this wave of innovation. And one of the innovations that we can't forget about was that HTML and CSS just had not moved forward at all for 5-7 years prior to that. Like, there had been this lull. So the smartphone really kind of kicked things back into gear, and This led to innovations in responsive design, and that built into another movement that was happening around the same time, open source. And the open source movement was pretty much driven by the development side of things, but it began to bleed over into design. And that's right about the time that we got Bootstrap and we got Foundation and these frameworks that really helped us wrap our heads around responsive design as a collective. And these things were great. We said, oh my God, Bootstrap, everybody's got to use Bootstrap. And you blinked and everything looked like Bootstrap. It's like we figured out how to adjust the CSS, the color, and just a little bit of the CSS, and everybody just used Bootstrap. And Bootstrap itself was not the enemy. The enemy was our our tendency to just, oh, it's done. It's just done. Slap our logo in there, it's done. We got really lazy and people began to react against that. And that's where components really come into play, because they're in the rejection of bootstrapification. People begin to say, you know what, our company is going to do its own bootstrap essentially, but we're going to expand on it, and we're not necessarily just going to give it to everybody, but we'll tell you how we did it. We'll tell you what our thinking is behind it. And that's where component-driven design and design systems were born, basically. Everybody's got their slightly different take on it, and I write about some agencies. I write about Gina Ann, who runs Clarity. I write about Brad Frost, who wrote Atomic Design. And then I look at how some different agencies use it. I look at how the BBC and their global, it's GEL, so it's Global Experience Language. Everybody's got a slightly different way of talking about. We have different definitions, and if there's anything in design that is consistent, it is that we cannot agree upon what we call these things, including, right down to the job title so that people hold. So it's been really interesting to write. It's also been a real pain in the butt, because I don't want to make everybody read what it. It just took me 5 minutes. I've been here monologuing for 5 minutes talking about this, but why should you have to read I don't know, 3,000, 4,000 words about that? I'm not even sure if that is interesting. Although what I probably will do, because of the way the program is set up right now, I will probably clip most of it away and put it off to the side, so that if you are interested in diving down that rabbit hole, it's there for you. But I'm not going to make people that aren't completely the historic. I'm a bit of a history buff, for better or worse. And I kind of dig in on things. I want to know where things came from. So that's why I write the way I do. But with that said, I want to go ahead and jump in, because actually it's a pretty light feedback loop this morning. Eve submitted her work last night, and oddly enough, it's been Eve, and Eve. Eve was the last submission in feedback loop. And you know what? What's interesting is we haven't actually looked at that. I haven't actually given Eve proper feedback in the feedback loop, because she submitted her work after feedback loop was recorded on Friday. So this actually will be our first time looking at Eve's work as a group. So we might as well take a peek. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, see if I can remember the proper keystroke, which I'd never do. So this is the designing feedback exercise that she's worked through, and let's go ahead and jump in. So there's states of activity, and one of the things that if we, let's see, does she have the original? She does not have the original, which is fine, by the way. It's not meant that you keep the original. But Eve's working through, and I'm just going to hide these for a second. Eve's working through and basically coming up with the different states necessary. So we're talking about active state, hover state, um, and what else do we have? Yeah, select it, and then looking at how these, how do we really create these different states that are necessary to tell us what's happening, to give us feedback when we're clicking around on our page. And the first thing she did was basically just added a little color so that like having an orange button here would make sense. So she got in and created a little branding, which is kind of interesting because one of the first things you really need when you're creating components is like, okay, so what are the underpinnings of this? What are my base colors? What's my base typography? Um, so here for hover, she's got it just makes an underline. When something is selected, it's bold and a thicker underline. So like if I navigate it to this pricing page, that's what happens. Um, so that orange that she had was for the default. So like when you load the page, it's orange to begin with, and then when you hover over it, it creates an outline and it reverses out the type because the type could if it went from orange to black, the type can't then also be black. And then finally, when you press on it, the type goes bold. Um, so the interesting thing here is that's actually not the exact same way that material design would tell you to handle it. And I do link to material design. But one of the things that I think is very interesting, I like material design, but I do think the contrast between states is very subtle. I don't necessarily know if it's a great experience from a feedback perspective. I like the cleanliness of the design. I like the spacing usage. I like the guidance it gives you for typography. But when it comes to feedback, I think that it's a little too subtle. Subtle to the point that I think it actually goes against what we talk about with accessibility. There's not enough difference for people to really see what's going on. So, I worked with Eve on that because at one point this was basically three versions of the same orange that had, a little white or a little dark, like there was some tint thrown onto it, and it didn't it didn't do what this is doing. This is showing clear feedback that works very well, and really, this was the only spot, Eve, that I said I thought we had any issue, and I think you've addressed that very well. Same thing over here. We took a stab at a Spanish site, and the important thing here is not necessarily that you know a foreign language. That's not the point. The point is basically removing the focus on what is this section, what is this content, and worrying more about how do I provide feedback. And here, Eventos, it goes bold when you hover over. It's underlined when it's active, and that's all fine. And then when we, so it's interesting. It's interesting that these are opposites of one another, because in the initial design, it's like this. There's an orange, and then there's the gray, and or I'm sorry, well, it was black and then white, and she changed it to orange and gray, which is fine. What all this is trying to do is basically say this is our primary and this is our secondary. Um, I think I would really, if this is our secondary, these both started out the same, and then you change this one to the gray. I think I would move this one to the gray as well, so that there's a clear, like right now, you went from having two different states or two different styles, which is fine. You want to have a primary and a secondary, to having three. And I think I would pull these two into alignment together so they can both be that secondary state. Um, and I really believe that if you did that, um, you know, you basically are saying that this default, that like these are basically opposites of one another, which I guess you could, but I really feel like that this begins to be part of this begins to be a primary when I really think the way you have it here allows us to, this is the primary and this is the secondary, and if you use that secondary everywhere else, this really is truly the primary. And um, I think you've got it solved here. I think this part of it just confuses it a bit. So that's how I would go about it. I do like the fact that you brought it to a similar place. You allowed basically the color to stand out, but then it moves. But I don't necessarily know if I would go, if I would move in the opposite direction of your primary call to action. So that's my 2 cents on that. Let's pull this back and let's go to part 2 here. So Eve now has been challenged with creating an empty state, and I thought she did a really good job here, basically coming in and saying, okay, there's a couple of different directions you can go. You can create a form or you can import participants. The interesting thing here is that they both, the bright blue, it feels like it's active, and I would suggest going the other direction with this, using the light version of it for, because there's not a preferred here. This is 2 options, and either one would be equally welcome. You can create a form, or you can import like with an existing CSV or whatever. So I would actually flip this. I would go with create a form in light. I'd go with this in the outline, and then on click or hover, I would go with the blue. Simply because I'm trying to indicate action. Like there's an action that's occurring, and I'm interacting, and I want that feedback. It could go the other way. This just the way you have it. I just feel like the bright blue already. It just seems like each of these are already active, and you've got 2, so it's not really. It's both of them are jumping at you. This is probably opinion. Okay, I'm venturing into the side of this is what I would do. I want to make sure that you realize this. That does not mean that this is wrong. Okay, and there's a difference. So I'm just giving you my opinion on that. It's totally fine the way you have it. And then finally, this was a really interesting one, because I really felt like Eve did an excellent job on this. Basically, this is confirmation, and confirmation can go a couple of different directions. If you place the order, you basically get a confirmation that the order has been placed. And that's way different than if you cancel an order, because when the confirmation occurs is very dependent on what actually is happening. So here the order's been placed, and she created a confirmation page, and all of this works, and you can come down here and continue shopping if you want, and it's a mirror basic image of it. Over here, it's canceled, and when something is canceled, you basically need to confirm that is really what you want to have happen. And the destructive actions are always something that we want to push in front of people and say, hey, listen, I know you said cancel. Is that really what you want to do? This is not where we goad them into not canceling. But you also want to use clear language. Like it's right now, it says cancel order. Are you sure you want to cancel this order? You will lose all the items in your cart. This action cannot be undone. Are you sure you want to cancel this order? If she said yes, no sounds very close to cancel. yes also sounds agreeable to cancel. So adding the extra bit of phrasing here, no, never mind, yes, cancel my order, makes it very clear what's going to happen when I click this red button. I'm going to cancel the order because it says, yes, cancel my order. When we talk about microcopy, and we talk about clarity of the action, this, that is exactly what Eve has done here. She's added clarity to the action. And if there's anything, like, I've had people say, well, won't students just copy each other if you record these sessions and people can see what everybody's working on? And if clarity is what you decide to take from this and you insert that into your work, great. You're a better designer for it. Fantastic. I'd rather you not guess around about stuff like that. I'd rather you just use the clearest language possible so that people know when they interact with your work what you're actually doing, and you're not you're not being deceptive about it. So yeah, yes, cancel my order. Do that every time. And then she came back with, and we talked about this, like when you've emptied the cart and you've canceled the order, um, the this is the empty state, okay? And we talk about empty state in the chapter. Empty states are opportunities. We talk about empty state in microcopy as well, which reminds me. I should just link to the microcopy work that we've done, because microcopy was. This is so much about microcopy as well, because you're having to write the microcopy in here. So I'm going to link to that. People that because people come to the content in so many different directions, I can't count on somebody having crossed through microcopy before they make it to here. So I'm going to link to that, because I feel like we've had a lot of these discussions, but not from the perspective of how do we design it. We've had these conversations about, okay, what are we writing? But it says confirmation needed, order canceled, and then there's this opportunity here, and we talked about it. Hey, sorry, this it says we're sorry this one wasn't the best fit for you, but we're always updating our inventory and adding new options. Here's a 15% off discount code for when you find that perfect fit. In there the discount code BB15. And previously we had a very interesting. I call it interesting because we both had a giggle, had a laugh about it, because it said, instead it said your order has been successfully canceled, and then it said go home, go back home, and the button was the language in the button was go back home, and it's like very very harsh. And we had a good laugh about that, but I think that you've softened it up. I also get questions a lot about the centering of typography. This is a small enough bucket of type that I'm okay with it. I did see on last week's portfolio potluck, which we're doing again on Wednesday. I did see a block of type that was like, I don't know, 200 words or so, and I just reacted very viscerally to it. So just know that if I haven't reacted viscerally to the centered type, that means it's a small enough like presentation that it's not going to draw my ire. This is about as far as I go with it, though. So I want to make perfectly clear, like, I would not do a lot more type than this in a centered orientation. But that said, Eve, I think overall, you've done a lot of good work here. So, this is opinion. So I just want to call it like I see it. I really think that this one is spot on. I like it, but the difference here is this is the only option. Okay, this is the only option when you've got a pair of equally good options. I think I would draw away from making them both hyper, like full throttle, bright, and flip it the other way. And then over here, I would just go for simplification. I always want there to be a couple of button options available, but when we get past two, I begin to go, do I really need the third one? I don't know. Um, Checking over here on Discord, it looks like we're clear. So what I'm going to do, and I'm going to do this for your benefit and mine, is I'm going to wrap up. And the reason I'm going to wrap up is because I'm in the midst of writing and editing components, and I want to get that out as quickly as possible. Not just for Eve and Luigi and Kara, but also for James and Katie and Tejal and Rebecca and Melanie popped back up this weekend. It's very interesting. I'm super excited to see if Melanie jumps back into the fray with us as well. But that will be something that we'll see very soon. But tell your friends. Tell your friends. Enrollments are open. Always happy to grow the camaraderie here and the cohort. I am doing portfolio potlucks every Wednesday at noon. We've got a almost full ship for Wednesday's edition, but there is space remaining. So if you have a friend that would like to take part, feel free to share the link. I will drop that into Discord. So if you're looking for that, feel free to send that link to them. And otherwise, hey, Chris Courtney here, Feedback Loop. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you all again tomorrow. Take care.